各位早安，谢谢大家在星期天早上来听我们的演讲。今天这一场呢是由2位香港亚洲艺术文献库的代表。第一位是在我左手边的杜柏贞女士，杜柏贞博士，她是亚洲艺术文献库的董事会主席，也是非常资深的艺术史研究者。那他今天给我们主题已经在台上了，也是从他的博士论文的著作中的发表。那第2场呢，等一下是由翁子健先生，也是亚洲艺术文献库的资深研究员，他也是一位策展人，所以请大家洗耳恭听，谢谢。
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Leslie, for that introduction. Thank you very much, the Taipei Fine Arts Museum. Spring Foundation is incredibly important, and Zhang Boxin, it's so nice to have met you at AAA and to see you again here. Thank you for arranging this. I also want to thank Judy and Kui Yi, my colleagues and old friends, for making such a good giving such a good introduction to the 1980s, from the very early, late 70s to 1989. It is the period that I will talk about today. But my perspective is slightly different from theirs. My perspective is also slightly different from most scholars. I have to reveal a secret that's buried deep in my CV and my bio. I was actually a banker for 15 years, much longer than I've ever been a scholar. So the perspective that I come from is slightly different than many of the papers that are given today and at academic settings such as this. In many academic settings, as we have seen, scholars are interested, and importantly so, on the intersection of politics and art, or the intersection of social transformation, society, and art. But what I'm going to look at today is the intersection of economics, commerce, and art, very broadly speaking. The paper will look at the impact of the early economic reforms in mainland China during the 1980s, starting in the late 1970s and going through the late 1980s, on the impact of economics and economic reform on art. And the last part of the paper, I am going to talk about an artist who's come up several times in the last 2 days, Wu Shandran, and his perspective, or his commentary on art and economics. For decades, critics have written disapprovingly or disparagingly about the relationship between the market and art. In the 1970s, proponents of institutional critique wrote in Art Forum about the degrading effects of money on art. And in the 1980s, Robert Hughes, author of Shock of the New, and the director of the Mona Lisa Curse, which is on YouTube, and I urge you all to look at. Robert Hughes compared the deleterious effect of the market on art to strip mining on nature. More recently, Hal Foster has disparaged the work of some of the market's most hot stars, or hottest art stars, Takashi Murakami, Damien Hirst, and Jeff Koons, declaring that their pop concoctions lack tension, critical distance, and irony, offering little more than, quote, giddy delight, weary despair, or a manic depressive cocktail of the two. Adding colorfully to the chorus of dissent is Jerry Saltz, a writer for the Village Voice in New York, who a year ago singled out, quote, zombie abstraction, a term coined by Walter Robinson to describe a highly popular form of, quote, decorator-friendly art fair art that, according to Saltz, appeals to buyers because it feels cerebral, yet hip, in ways that flatter them, even as it offers no insight into anything at all. Moralistic invectives that inveigh against the degrading impact of the market on art are not unique to New York-based critics. Soon after the end of the Cultural Revolution, when few people think that China had any art market at all, plainly worded attacks on commercialism appeared regularly in the nationally circulated art press. As early as 1979, Zhang Feng, who we've met in Judy's previous paper, the chair of the Chinese Artists Association, worried in writing that ink painters were churning out inferior works in pursuit of material gain. In 1983, the conservative critic Hai Yuan wrote that, quote, owing to the opportunity for high profit margins, many painters working in oil or other medium have switched to ink painting. And even worse, to maximize their gain, these painters, quote, sought to boost their productivity by acting like walking photocopy machines. In the 1990s, supporters of experimental oil painting also came under attack. After visiting the 1992 Guangzhou Biennale Art Fair, avant-garde art critic Li Shenting was reportedly so overcome by the potential dangers of commercialism that he wept. Other visitors to this watershed show were so upset by the contaminating effect of commerce that they sprayed the exhibition hall with Lysol to extinguish its stench. And after a few months later, still others organized a mock funeral to mourn the death of artists that had succumbed to commerce. But for critics in China, unlike those in the West, the foreign identity of many of the buyers of contemporary art added to the sting. And for decades, nationalism, even xenophobia, has inflected the debate. When Zhu Qi wrote in 1999 that Westerners do not understand Chinese art and suggested that artists who pander to their tastes risk compromising their personal integrity and their creative ability, many critics in the 1980s would have agreed, just as they might still agree today. While acknowledging the concerns of these important critics, I am going to use this opportunity to argue the opposite. For it is my opinion that in the context of China in the 1980s and early 90s, the introduction of economic reforms, and by extension, the market, liberated many artists from the strictures of the state and created an alternative space, incipient yet real, unstable yet protean, from which emerged artistic experiments of imagination and force. Among the artists who recognized the empowering potential of the market and its pitfalls was Wu Shandran, about whose early work I will discuss in some depth. Now a little background to the slides up here. In China, from 1949 to 1979, the dominant and singular system of support and control of the arts was the state. Artists were not only educated and employed by the state in state-controlled schools. Here we have the Hangzhou Academy, a photograph from the early 1980s, 1980, that we've talked about many times this today. They were employed by the state in state-controlled schools, but they lived in state-owned housing and produced work in state-owned studios with allocated state-owned art supplies, which were then displayed at state-organized exhibitions that took place in state-controlled venues. Here we have the Meishuguan. On the left-hand side, we've talked about this exhibition hall, the National Gallery on this side. And if the artists were lucky, their work might garner state-organized awards and be published in the state-controlled media. On the right-hand side, you have Meishu magazine, which was really the singular magazine prior to the 1980s, the singular art magazine, that was actually publishing art by living artists at the time. But starting in the late 1970s, China embarked on a series of far-reaching economic reforms. These reforms were aimed at reigniting a stalled economy and were epitomized by the appearance of a marketplace. First, in the countryside, and soon after in the towns and cities, where farmers and townspeople alike sold their agricultural produce and handmade products and services for prices determined by supply and demand rather than state policy. By the mid-1980s, these economic directives expanded to include large state-owned enterprises. These companies that range from media concerns to manufacturers were exhorted to become financially accountable and to make a profit. I'm just showing, these are magazines starting from 1982 through 1987, 88. The end of, these are English language magazines, but they were published in China, and on the cover of these magazines and inside these magazines were many articles about the emerging marketplace, emerging free markets in China. In the arts, this meant that agencies of the state organized exhibitions of ink painting and later realist oil painting that were sent abroad to Japan and to the West to develop diplomatic ties, to generate business opportunities, and to raise foreign currency. Here are examples of exhibitions that came to the United States during the early 1980s and through the later 1980s, 87, that were organized by state agencies in China to sell ink painting primarily, but then later some oil painting as well. These were soft power initiatives, I think we would call them today, but they were also importantly to raise foreign currency for China, who was desperately in need of that at the time. In another widespread effort to raise foreign currencies, shops selling paintings to an increasing influx of tourists proliferated all over China. Even the National Gallery, alternatively called NAMAC, the National Art Museum of China, or in Chinese, Zhongguo Meishuguan, expanded its retail initiatives, rented their gallery space, and hosted sales exhibitions. An example of these sales exhibitions was a series organized between 1986 and 89 by the Beijing International Art Palace, Beijing Yiyuan, Guoji Yiyuan, a partnership between the Chinese government and a Japanese real estate developer. Here's some catalogs from that series of exhibitions. Headed by a senior official of the Chinese Artists Association, and again, it was Liu Xun, again, who's come up, who was one of the protectors of the STARS group that Judy mentioned in her paper. A gentleman that you saw speaking to Wang Guoping at the fence in the early exhibition that they did, the STARS did. Headed by Liu Xun, who was then a senior official in the Chinese Artists Association, this joint venture company held 15 sales exhibitions at the National Gallery until establishing their own gallery at the Holiday Inn Crown Plaza in Wangfujing in 1991. The pressure to raise fee income became so great, in fact, that the National Gallery started rotating their exhibitions with such frequency that by 1988 it was presenting 200 shows a year. Let me just go back and say a little bit about this invitation. Here's an invitation to one of the sales exhibitions organized by the Beijing Guoji Yiyuan, the Beijing International Palace. It was this company, this joint venture company, and as you can see on the invitation, it says in English, and not on the Chinese side of the invitation, that the exhibits are available for sale. So the pressure to raise fee income resulted in the fact that these exhibitions at the National Gallery started rotating very quickly. By 1988, it was presenting 200 shows a year, of which 95% lasted less than 2 weeks, and many only a few days. The museum had come to resemble a commercial gallery, and of the type of work displayed in these short-term shows, the largest percentage was ink painting. An exception to this trend of ink painting sales shows, was the nude oil painting exhibition. Discussed at length by Richard Krauss in his book, The Party and the Arty, this exhibition, which ran from December 22nd, 1988 to January 8, 1989, was one of the most popular and profitable shows in the history of the National Gallery. According to Krauss, quote, the nude art show created a sensation even before it opened. As early as June, 47 Chinese newspapers and 7 foreign news services carried reports of the coming show. The unprecedented exhibit attracted about 250,000 visitors in 18 days. Taking advantage of its immense popularity, the cost of admissions tickets was raised 10 times, from the usual 2 mao to 2 yuan. And a fully illustrated catalog, and this is the cover of the catalog, was sold and sold out for the then exorbitant price of 45 yuan. 45 yuan was about a month's salary at that point in time. But it wasn't just fee-hungry museum administrators and organizers with overtly commercial goals who saw the possibilities inherent in the newly emerging space between the state and the market. Champions of experimentalism in the arts saw it too. One was Robert Rauschenberg, who in 1985 rented gallery space at the National Gallery from the Chinese International Exhibition Agency, an arm of the Ministry of Culture. Another was the irrepressible advocate of Chinese avant-garde art, Gao Minglu, who, with funds raised from several sponsors, including a fast food entrepreneur named Song Wei, was able to rent this prestigious venue for the now famous Chinese avant-garde show. Here are the covers of Rauschenberg's catalog of the Chinese version of the Rocky show, this traveling show that went through the world at that point in time. He came to China as well known and was again discussed earlier and showed at the Meishuguan, and it's a very important exhibition for lots of young artists who went to see it. As well, he went to Lhasa in Tibet and showed there. But Gao rented the prestigious venue, the Meishuguan, or the National Gallery, and the rental cost was 50,000 renminbi, a huge amount at the time when you think that monthly salaries are between about 45 and 60 yuan a month. But Gao's entanglement with commerce did not end there. To close the deficit in his 150,000 renminbi budget, the budget for the exhibition, his financing strategy included selling artwork in the show. A price list is available, and it makes very interesting reading because there's prices on every exhibition, every painting or object in the show by the artists, as well as artwork that they were going to show were going to sell in addition to that. But unfortunately, this plan ultimately failed, and Gao was left with a large unpaid debt. The market created new opportunities for commercial and cultural entrepreneurs, as we have seen, but also for some artists. It became a new imaginary. Regarding the China Avant-Garde exhibition, artist Zhang Pei Li remembered that rather than a typical art show, quote, it looked more like a farmer's market. What mattered that day was not the art. Here's the China Avant-Garde show, and we've seen photographs of the show in the previous exhibitions. But Zhang Pei Li compared it to a farmer's market. What mattered that day was not the art or the show itself. Everybody knew that they were making history. We were totally invested in our roles as actors on a stage where anybody could suddenly become a star. One of the stars of this grand art bazaar was Wu Shandran, who bought several bags 30 kilograms of raw shrimp from his hometown of Zhoushan, which is it's an island actually outside of Shanghai, to the National Gallery, where he set up a shop by erecting a makeshift sign on a board on which he wrote the following message. Dear customers, as our entire nation celebrates the Year of the Snake, the exhibition happened over Chinese New Year, in order to enrich the spiritual and material life of the people of our nation's capital, I have brought from my hometown of Zhoushan the highest quality export shrimp to be sold in the domestic market. Venue of display and sale, National Gallery of Art. Price, 9.5 yuan per caddy. Hurry while supplies last. On the day of the opening, visitors to the museum crowded around the makeshift market stall to buy frozen blocks of shrimp. Business looked like it was going to be brisk, and Liu Kuai-chu, who was the director of the National Gallery at that time, was one of Wu's first customers. Here we have an article in Zhongguo Meishu Bao, Fine Arts of China, of this transaction. However, instead of reaping a profit, Wu's performance was soon suspended by authorities. The exhibition had only been open for about a half an hour when two plainclothes policemen ordered him to stop, tore up his notice, and took him away. A little while later, he returned to the exhibition hall to write on his chalkboard, temporarily closed for stock taking. Wu's deceptively straightforward performance has been interpreted in a number of ways. Gaoming Liu has written that Wu's action were, quote, a rebellion against the art museum and art critics. Some of Wu's own writings support this interpretation. Here I quote Wu again. Selling shrimps in the National Gallery is a protest against the court that judges artworks, the art museum itself. The authority of the art museum subjects art, an innocent lamb, to a trial conducted according to quasi-legal process. The authority of the museum also subjects artists to the process of testifying as eyewitnesses, resulting in a good waste of space. Selling shrimps is also a protest against art critics, as their dominance of the critique of art will end in the tragedy of turning art from nothing to everything, and turning artists into salesmen who peddle their goods, the goods they produce, resulting in a waste of good money. Dissatisfaction with state-controlled institutions of art was widespread at the time, and another artist to voice his disdain was Huang Yongping, who conducted a series of provocative performances, including the display of junk inside a museum and the incineration of artworks outside the museum. However, in a more muted yet equally pointed work, Huang extended his assault on the art institution by submitting a proposal to the China Avant-Garde exhibition in which he planned to attach up to 4,000 meters of rope to 60 locations on the facade of the National Gallery. And we see here his plan to attach ropes to the front of the National Gallery in order to tow the building away from its site. Like trapping a whale in a large fishing net, Huang sought to subdue the behemoth. By dislodging the museum from its position of authority, he sought to expose not only its structural supports, but also its vulnerability. Geng Zhenyi was another artist who made institutional critique an important focus of his artistic activity. For example, one of his submissions to the China Avant-Garde exhibition targeted the bureaucratic tendency of many of the participants in the art system, including the aspiring avant-garde organizers. Prompted by the blizzard of official-looking notices and forms issued by Gaoming Liu and his organizational team, Geng disseminated his own mock applications, which asked his unwitting recipients to fill out. These deceptively official-looking but ultimately absurd forms not only exposed the eager willingness of the organizers to adapt to official protocols, but also reflected the conformist impulses of aspiring artists equally eager to comply with any authority in the hopes of gaining acceptance. So many of you obviously have had to fill out many forms in your life, whether it's the doctors or going to school or other kinds of things. This form starts out extremely conventionally, asking for your name and your date of birth. But it begins to slide fairly quickly into these kind of absurd questions, like what is your favorite animal? To which Huang Yunping responded, a human. And then what is your favorite human? To which he responds, an animal. Huang Yunping, however, saw through this ruse by Geng Zhenyi, as did Wu Shanduan, who responded tongue-in-cheek. Many others answered Geng's forms in earnest. Institutional critique was a common concern among local art critics. But just as the closure of the avant-garde show was politicized by many foreign critics, and we saw that Judy, I don't know whether I have an image of it, no. Judy showed, or Kuei showed, the fairly controversial performance by a woman named Xiaolu and aided by a colleague named Tang Song, whereby they, or she, shot with a live firearm her own installation. In fact, it was her graduation piece in the beginning, at the start of a very crowded reception. This closed the exhibition and has been interpreted in many ways. But it was, of course, and has been, of course, highly politicized in its interpretation. But I urge everybody also to read Xiaolu, this woman artist's recent book called Dialogue, to talk about it, which she gives a sort of late-in-the-day discussion about her intentions and motivations for that piece. Institutional critique was a common concern among local art critics. But just as the closure of the avant-garde show was politicized by many foreign critics, so was Wu's work. Norman Bryson, for example, writing in a later moment, saw Wu's performance as political dissent. Quote, selling shrimp was all about restriction, he wrote, revealing that, quote, behind the museum and behind even big business lay the iron hand of the state. Other critics have argued that Wu's work was a protest against commercialism. Jeremy Barmé, for one, has noted that Wu's conflation of the museum with the marketplace revealed that the National Gallery, which was making its stalls, quote, available to virtually any self-styled avant-garde who could afford the rental fee, unquote, was not so much controlled by socialist dogma as it was by the dollar bill. Wu's writing, always arcane, could support this interpretation as well. And this is Wu speaking. On the morning of February 4th, which is a bit of a mystery because the show opened on February 5th, on the morning of February 4th, 1989, the Art Museum became every bit the black market that it was when the museum was built, where the theories produced there could be resold in the secondary market. With big business, you have something to sell, but you cannot just go out and sell it. You want to buy something, but you cannot just go out and buy it. There's always this man in the middle, toting a black briefcase and controlling your myth-making traditions. Wu's equation between the ecology of the art system and big business was prescient. According to Gaoming Lu, at a large conference held in 1988 in Huangshan, Anhui, Wu was one of the first to compare art and business. In this address, Wu referred to 1987 as the year that the Chinese masses, including the intellectual class, which artists were a part, accepted business as integral to their new way of life. Quote, although some Chinese intellectuals tried to escape from this commercialism, he said, Da Sheng Yi, big business, has become the affair of all Chinese citizens. The Chinese artist Yu Han must have noticed a similar tendency when in 1988, he painted this set of pop-inspired renminbi. Like the art practice of many of his contemporaries, Wu's work was about exposing boundaries and breaking taboos, and business provided a tantalizing new field of conceptual inquiry. Wu and his close family members had been involved in business. Wu's father was an amateur inventor who constantly was dreaming up new ways to make money. Wu also tried his own hand at business by selling fish in his hometown of Zhoushan. In the 1980s, Wu explains, it was the time of the middleman in business, and I sold fish. In those days, he remembered that one could make 25% in commissions, but he actually made much less, only 8%, because he worked with several friends with whom he had to split the fees. Selling shrimps, he said, was in fact inspired by the concept of the middleman, who negotiated, mediated, facilitated exchange, and whose flexibility and pragmatism offered a refreshing alternative to the ponderous strictures of an economy that had been, until recently, entirely centrally planned. People were selling everything, Wu recalled, from shrimps and fish to pots and pianos, and so he began to think of art in that way, although he admitted it was not really that way at all at the time. And while Wu's performance involves selling shrimp in the name of art, as he would later write, he fully intended to make a profit from his performance. If he had not been stopped by the police, he estimated he would have earned about $200 US. But his shrimps got ruined, and so he didn't make any money. Wu's business in this name of art had faltered. With the result, he had to borrow from a friend to pay for his train ticket home. In the context of the contemporary debate about the market in the state, Wu was a middleman in art and business. By exploiting their intersection and making it the subject of his work, he erected a special artistic zone, zones of art, as Norman Bryson has written, where neither the rules of the state nor the rules of the capitalist market fully applied. It was the time of gray money, he said. While all salaries were much the same in the early 1980s, by the mid-decade, the ability to make gray money became increasingly important, which Wu claimed ultimately was one of the reasons for the Tiananmen Square incident. Quote, the economy was booming, there was gray money everywhere. For example, I used to buy and sell fish, I was a middleman. That's why I sold shrimp at the National Gallery show. But as Wu explained, gray money led to gray thinking. People called for democracy, and things went too far. That was when the government cracked down. Yet, it was in this shifting landscape that artists and entrepreneurs found ways to make connections, to create, and to profit. Making money was becoming a new ideology. And just as the cartoonist in 1989 substituted a renminbi note for the people, instead of wei renming fu, we have wei renminbi fu. And this was published in China in a magazine, again, it was the Beijing Review. Just as the cartoonist in 1989 substituted a renminbi note for the people, Wu celebrated its allure by putting it in a commemorative frame, exposing the new paradigm of exposure and support that emerged in the hybrid space between the state and the market. Wu made the dynamic middle zone the very subject of his investigation. The museum had become a marketplace, and as such, the marketplace had assumed the sanctity of the museum. As Wu would later say, to buy is to create. Straddling the fault lines between political and economic cultures, between ideology and materialism, Wu gave form to a new imaginary. And in so doing, he exposed art's new energy source. On June 4th, 1989, 4 months after the conclusion of the China Avant-Garde exhibition, the government cracked down, as Wu so succinctly stated. And the impact on the arts was swift. The number of exhibitions presented at the National Gallery in the following 6 months dropped 40% from the year before. Art publications were censored and shut down, and curators and editors were demoted or reassigned. Champions of experimentalism in the arts, including their right-wing protectors within the political establishment, had lost the struggle for greater social and cultural freedom. The conservative left wing had won. But the empowering potential of market reform, identified by Wu and his compatriots, did not falter. In the 1980s, the market had become a new imaginary, offering artists and their advocates the prospect of an alternative space of legitimization and support. But in the aftermath of the Tiananmen crisis, the market was not just an imaginary. It had become an imperative, at least for some, responding to the institutional intolerance for experimental art that characterized the 1990s. Certain, not all, certain enterprising artists and their entrepreneurial champions began to embrace the art market as a possible solution to their professional constraints. Exemplifying this trend was the Guangzhou Biennale Art Fair organized by Liu Peng in 1992 and the early career of Wang Guangyi. Bearing further witness to the enabling role of commerce are the curatorial projects of Zhang Zongren, Johnson Chang, and the Han Art Gallery, and others. But these are stories for another time. Today, I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
我们刚才有了非常精彩的两篇报告。其实杜老师所说的市场给予艺术家的自由跟限制，还有翁子健提到的文件给予艺术家的自由和限制，这其实是一个相辅相成的，可以看得到80、90年代中国大陆艺术发展的一个现象跟一个文本啊。而且这两位呢，希望他们其实是80、90年代这个文献还有艺术研究的非常专家，所以呢，大家应该利用这个机会赶快多问一些问题，好吗？请举手。来，老师，有没有麦克风啊？
好，谢谢两位哈。我想问翁子健请教他一个问题哈。那这个问题是刚刚你谈到档案的有限性哈。那我们在看到很多就是因为档案的有限性，我们在谈一些美术史的展览的时候，常常会碰到一个所谓复刻的问题。好，昨天我跟维中有聊到这个部分哈，因为我们看到这个在Guggenheim Museum 的时候做那个展览的时候，李宇焕的作品也经过他本人做了所谓的再呈现或者是复刻。那在针对这个档案的有限的时候，你们怎么看待这个作品的就是重制或者复刻的问题哈？它的怎么样看待它哈？它的属性是什么？然后它有些时候它被复刻之后还被美术馆再典藏，然后它已经不是原作，可是它再被典藏。那这个所谓的跟这个 authenticity 之间的关系，还有这个著作权的关系，还有这个所谓里面会有一种伦理的问题了哈，包括是谁去复制，谁去重置哈，我想请教这个问题。
喂，这个是一个特别好的问题。在最近几年的话，我就是刚好是不断的碰到这个问题。为什么呢？因为最近几年我们跟艺术展览合作很多。就是包括去年和今年跟广州时代美术馆他们做了一个大尾像艺术小组的一个回顾展。那我们知道大尾像艺术小组在广州的话是90年代他们做很多展览，他们是做这个 site specific 的作品的，是根据当时的场域在做的材料，就是做完几天就得拆掉了。那么做这样一个小组的回顾展呢，怎么做呢？就没有原作了。所以就涉及到你刚才提到的这个问题，就是没有原作的话，你是怎么去复刻？这是他们也思考了这个问题很多，但是没有一个就是完全的解决方法，是非常的 case by case 的。比如说，特别在中国啊，可能在欧美的情况不一样。我们知道 Lemon Park 等等的，他们都是尽力的去找他们当时的一个型号的电视机啊等等，这个回复到当时的感觉。但是中国我觉得也不一定是这样，为什么呢？因为像大尾像在当时90年代做作品的时候，他们对于这个材料对物质性的限制也很大。因为当时经济条件不好，或者是中国的物质条件不好，他们根本就没有办法找到他们最想要的电视机或者最想要的材料，他们都是半推半就的，就是我找不到这个。像我们现在年轻人做展览也是这样，我找不到什么我就找，那个就算了 ，iPad 没有就用那个玩回来，等等这种。所以说这个东西是没有一个艺术的决定在里面的。可能就是当时一个条件偶然碰到这个材料，刚好我朋友有那个东西我就用了， 所以在这个时候，我们就 case by case 啊，就是说这个作品的重点在哪里？这个作品的重点是在它物质性，还是它的视频的内容，还是说它的形象，还是说它的观念？用大北山这个例子，大北山这个展览策划人是侯汉儒跟蔡颖倩，他们就强调最重要的是重现当时的气氛，所以在当时这个他们花了很多的心机去做这个展场，把展场布置成当时的地下戏那种感觉，当然是不可能100%，但是也有这种感觉。原作也是相当程度的重现，但我们都知道就是现在看到这个版本跟当初的版本是有落差的，但是我就是没有必要太急着这个问题。然后前2年我记得那个孙顺荣老师在北艺大做那个录像展览也是遇到这个问题，因为他们60年代70年代台湾的录像很多原作都没有了，特别是那个录像装置。然后就重置只能是这样，所以就是但是值得一提就是在这个过程里面，文献扮演了非常重要的角色。就是如果我们没有足够的当时的照片的话，我们也不可能知道当时是什么情况，没有当时的方案等等的话，所以我们跟他合作了，跟时代合作了，就是我们一起做了很多档案的研究，确保我们对当时的情况就是完完全全了解，然后再下这个判断，是这样子。
还有没有问题？
Just want to add one thing about the video art or time-based media art. This is not a problem that you're just facing in Asia. It's a problem in the United States and any place where you have ephemeral art practice or art materials that are subject to obsolescence, whether it's Dan Flavin's neon bulbs, whether it's the candies that Felix Torres used for his certain installations. But time-based media is really, really a major issue now as obsolescence becomes increasingly concerning and expensive for museums to deal with. So this is not a problem just here. So documentation, I think, becomes extremely important around exhibitions in order to understand what it means to represent or to upgrade or transfer materials into another material. And then a lot of discussion and a lot of disclosure around it too. I think is important. Transparency in the exhibition of materials as well as artworks. Is an interesting, and it adds interesting layers and understanding to the project. So.
Can I just add something? The Namjoon Pike works which use cathode ray tubes. The curators and so on collected all the available ones and kept them because they know they are already manufactured. Sorry.
Smithsonian.
Yeah.
It's amazing what they've collected. I mean, just mountains and mountains for Namjoon Pike's materials, mountains of old TVs.
Yeah.
Very few institutions have the resources to do that. So I think it's really important to take this into consideration when you're thinking about, as a museum or as an institution, collecting these kinds of works, is what is the sustainability of supporting these works? Ultimately, it's going to mean that there's going to be very few there's a selection process. And so the editorial, the curatorial selection process is going to become even more critical when it comes to these kinds of materials, whether it's a video or something larger.
And the other thing to remember is that there are some people in Cornell, for example, I forget his name, who've set up procedures for re-recording decaying digital or analog tape material. So there are people around who know about this, but you've got to find them.
很重要的也是像补充各位刚才说的，跟艺术家做 interview， 就是从他们当时的经验来讲，然后除了对照文献之外，跟他们的对话也是很重要要保存的东西。有没有其他的问题？我们现在还有时间吗？还是还有？讲得太完整。
Anyway, I think it's time for lunch. Thank you very much.
谢谢大家，谢谢。